the Covenants of Promise Part 2. Now, this is going to be specifically about it's a Torah teaching about the covenants that are specifically in the Old Testament. It is the etymology of the word covenants where we're going to go over and how the Bible defines what this word means. Not just by the context, but also by the roots of it. Now, there are different types of biblical studies one can make, and one can focus on certain themes that are found in different areas of the Bible, also known as thematic or topical studies. Another type of study is textual criticism. This allows us to criticize what text reveals to be most accurate, thus establishing a higher degree of authority. Then relevant to this teaching that actually I'm doing today, we will be analyzing the word covenant in Hebrew and what does it mean in its context. This is what is considered a word study. Okay. And we will also go over some of the, in more depth, the different covenants we'll find from the beginning until the Exodus. Okay. Now, what is a covenant? Do you know what kind of covenants there are and why they were made? That's a good question, right? Now, let us first begin with what defines what a covenant is. In the Old Testament, according to the King James, it translates this Hebrew word Berit in the Strong's H1282 in the following manner. Covenant, 264 times. League, confederacy, confederate. And so it's mentioned 284 times just in the Tanakh alone. Now, the word Berit can also be defined depending on the context as a treaty, pact, formal agreement, solemn promise between two parties. Now, in the New Testament, the KJV translates this Greek word as diathek in the Strong's G1242 in the following manner: covenant, testament. Okay. Now, and I'll put that up there for you all, just so if you need to look at some other references. Now, the word covenant in Hebrew, Berit, is H1285. Derives from two root words. First primitive word is bara, H1254, means to create, to cut down. And the second primitive root word is bara, very similar, is H1262, means to feed, to manifest, give meat. Meat, another way of saying food. Both of these words begin with bayit and resh in Hebrew, but instead of ending with an aleph, the last consonant of the second word, bara, ends with bayit. So the last consonant on the second bara, on the second root word, ends with bayit, okay, instead of aleph. Now, the first letter, bayit, in the pictographic term can be defined as entering into a house, okay? And the second word, resh, means head, as in the head of a household. Now, considering that there are two root words describing one word, and each root word is described as having a head, and they are both looking to enter something. This really encapsulates that they are two entering into an agreement. So you have two root words with two heads in each one entering into one agreement. So I found that fascinating how those two root words become one. One of the root words is the third consonant as the Hebrew word hey, meaning to breathe, as in speaking an agreement between two people. and the other root word ends with an aleph, signifying strength and leader, as if one will be stronger than the other. Later, we will see how this word covenant, Brit, is defined along with different narratives of the Bible. Now, is the word covenant, when viewed through the ancient Hebrew perspective, an abstract or concrete word? I mean, you can taste it or feel it or touch it. Is it concrete or is it abstract? Well, this is more of an abstract word, okay? But one can define it as a concrete word meaning meat. Now, the word covenant signifies that there is a meat being given that is cut between two parties. And if someone breaks their part of the oath, then that person or party would need to be cut or divided from him or herself, representing that a penalty of death would be required. As we read in Jeremiah, it explains what the cutting of a calf into attached to a covenant represents. Let us look at Jeremiah 34, 18, 21. So we can get a clearer picture and construct of what the cutting of the calf means when making a covenant. And in Jeremiah 34:18, it reads, "As for the man who violated my covenant by not living up to the conditions of the covenant which they made in the presence when they cut the calf in two and passed between its parts, the leader of Yehuda, the leaders of Jerusalem, the officials and the Kohanim, the priest, and all the people of the land who pass between the parts of the calf, I will hand them over to their enemies, hand them over to those who seek their lives, and their corpse will be their food for the birds and the air and wild animals. And I will give Zedekiah, king of Judah, and his prince into the land of their enemies, into the hand of those who seek their life." Okay, so we have the word corpse, so there is a death that would follow. Okay, just as it had been done back in Genesis 15, 8 through 17, and I will go over that in just a little bit. Abraham, as you remembered, made a sacrifice, and the animals were split in two. Now, before I do get into that, I just wanted to also share Jeremiah 34:8, just to give you the context of what Jeremiah 34:18 that I just read is about. Now, King Zedekiah had made a covenant, a solemn oath ratified with the cutting of the calves with all the people who were at Jerusalem to proclaim liberty to them, that every man should set free his male and female slave after 6 years of labor during their Shemitah. But after we see that this covenant was broken, and because of those who walked between the divided calves had to pay the penalty of death for their transgression. When the landowners of Judah took back their dead slaves after the Egyptian invasion had temporarily lifted the siege of Jerusalem, they broke their solemn oath to Yahuwah and laid themselves open into punishment that led to their death. Okay? So there was a covenant made before all this happened, when they walk between the cut animals. Now, during my research, I found other definitions of how covenants are viewed in the Bible. Okay. A formal agreement or treaty between two parties, with each assuming some obligation. A covenant also might be imposed by a greater power upon a lesser one. The greater power demands loyalty and obligates itself to the protection of the lesser one. Protection over the lesser from the greater is part of the covenant promise. Now, there are covenants imposed by a greater one that obligates the protection of the lesser one, such as Israel and the Gibeonites, according to Josh 9. The request by Jabesh Gilead of the king of Ammon in 1 Samuel 11. And the book of the covenant, even though it was imposed, we find on Exodus 23:20 a description of protection that Israel was to receive being the lesser by Yahuwah, the greater through his angel and the protection therefrom. And as it reads, I am sending you an angel before you to guard you on the way and bring you to a place that I have prepared. Okay, so doesn't that sound familiar? I'm going to go and prepare a place for you. Part of the promise that Yahushua is leaving those who accept covenant. Now, be attentive to him and obey him. Do not rebel against him, for he will not forgive your sins. My authority is with him. If you obey him and carry out in all I tell you, I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. Okay, we see that the hand of Yah divinely protecting his covenant people, just as he had promised to Abraham, saying, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. A covenant that doesn't need two parties to agree is called a unilateral covenant or treaty. For example, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, imposed Zedekiah of Judah when he put him on the throne in Jerusalem as a king with limited authority, according to Ezekiel 17:11-14. This was an imposed declaration that would allow King Zedekiah to raise himself up, that wouldn't allow King Hezekiah to raise himself up with any power. I mean, a similar thing just happened, just like the disarmament that Nebuchadnezzar placed on King Hezekiah as part of the treaty. We can also compare this to what happened to Germany back in 1919, when the Versailles Treaty was ratified. This treaty held Germany responsible for starting a war and imposed harsh penalties in terms of loss of territory, massive reparation payments, and the demilitarization of the country. Now, this disarmament placed on the German military restricted their army down to just 100,000 men, while their navy was reduced to only 15,000 men. Economic distress and resentment of the treaty with Germany helped fuel the ultra-nationalist sentiment that led to the rise of Adolf Hitler. He was a liberator to them. Like, you know, I think people think Trump is a liberator to the country by the Republicans. Or you have Chavez, who was liberator of Cuba. So you have somebody that stands out, that wants to liberate, who in their terms think they're being oppressed. Absolutely, they were being oppressed. Now, we know from history that the Bolshevik Jews were responsible for much of their economic distress. For it is why there was a great amount of sentiment and retaliation against the Bolshevik Jews by the Germans who had been suffering under their oppression. Okay. Now, we also have let me go to the screen here. Another definition of a covenant with the context of the Bible, including Ephesians, Hebrew, and Galatians. So now we're going to look at the word. What does the Bible, according to the New Testament, describe what a covenant is? We see here in the context of Ephesians and Hebrews on how we can view what a covenant is. Ephesians 2:12 reads, that at the time you were without Moshiach, being excluded aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, as strangers from the covenant of promises, having no hope without Eloah in the Olam Hazed, in the world. We see that the covenant in this context comes with a promise. The promise is the one that goes back to Genesis 12. According to, and I'll read also another place that we can find in context what this word means, Hebrews 9:15. And for this reason, he is the mediator of the new covenant by means of death, for the redemption of transgression under the first covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance. So we see here that the death of Messiah paid the death penalty attached to the first covenant from Genesis 15, allowing those who are called from the two houses to reconnect back to Genesis 12 through the new covenant. Okay, so attached to this covenant are promises. And the third one we have here is Galatians 3:15. Brethren, I speak in the matter of man, Though it is only man's covenant, yet it is confirmed or ratified. No one annuls or adds to it. Now, once a covenant is confirmed and ratified with blood, one cannot add or take away from it. This is a stipulation of a covenant that with certainty leads us to understand that the covenant that was ratified at Mount Sinai in Exodus 24:11 was declared complete, and no other law could have been added to it. An everlasting covenant can have the intention of lasting forever, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will fulfill that expectation. This would be like taking a marriage vow with two people, making a covenant with the expectation that it will last for the rest of their lives. But it doesn't mean it can't break on the way there. We hope, right? We have faith that it will last, but sometimes things do happen. Now, take, for example, the covenant of Abraham made with Yahuwah. There was a death penalty attachment to the covenant, and that was broken. Then it would last forever. Because why? Because if there is a transgression involved, then all of a sudden that covenant wouldn't be a covenant forever anymore. Now in Genesis 17:13, it reads, "My covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised male child who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from the people. He has broken my covenant." Okay? So right there, a broken covenant, what would happen? No longer, this would be something that will just keep going forever and ever and ever. Okay? I think I went back. Whoop. Okay. So, sorry about that, guys. All right. So what we have here, we have the different types of covenants. Okay. Now there are some covenants made between people, and there are some covenants that were made between Elohim and man. Now, what are just some of these covenants between people? Okay. Most of the covenants made between two humans in the scripture, in the Bible, were bilateral, with both sides contributing to the terms and making promises. Now, the covenant of salt is mentioned 3 times in the Bible. The purpose of salt was to make something taste better and to make some foods even last longer. Because salt was employed as a preservative, its use in the covenantal context also emphasized the expectation that the covenant will last for a very long time. Now, because salt inhibits the leavening action of yeast, which represents rebellion, salt could also additionally stand for that which prevented rebellion as well. Okay, so it has like a double meaning to it. Now, but within the context of Numbers 18:19, we can get a clear picture of what a covenant of salt is referring to. As it is written, all the heave offerings of the holy things or set apart things, which the children of Israel offered to Yahuwah, I have given to you and your sons and your daughters with you as an ordinance forever. It is a covenant of salt forever before Yahuwah, with you and your descendants with you. This was a covenant that was made for the priest, and the surrounding context has revealed that the provisions of the priests and their descendants were going to come from those in the land. The establishment of the enduring covenant is like salt that endures, okay, and it does not rot. That's one of the Sage's interpretation of that. Now, we also can look at the context of what a covenant of what salt represents in Ezra. On 4:14, those who tasted the salt the literal Hebrew of the Persian king, placed were bound to loyalty to him. So in the context of Ezra, when one is to give salt to another, it shows a type of ratification by which there would be an expectation of loyalty. There is even salt mixed with incense that was to be placed before the Ark of the Covenant, where Yahuwah said he would meet Moshe. Okay, so even at the presence of Yahuwah, there was salt, even when speaking to Moshe. Abraham and Abimelech, we have another covenant here. So we have the Abimelech, the Philistine king, in Genesis 21:27. Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech. And the two of them made a covenant, a treaty, granting Abraham a well that was seized by Abimelech's servants earlier, and assurance that Abimelech would receive equitable treatment for years to come from Abraham. As a result of making this mutual oath, the name of the well was named Beersheba, well of the oaths. Another covenant we see here was between Jacob and Laban. In Genesis 31:43, and Laban answered and said to Jacob, "These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and the flocks of my flocks." Okay, and so on. And so let us make a covenant, you and I, and let there be a witness between you and me. So a covenant was made between them not to harm each other, according to Genesis 31:52, and is a testament to this mutual oath. A pillar and heap of stones was built by Jacob as a testament. This covenant of reconciliation was confirmed by a covenant ritual of building pillars of stone, an oath, a sacrifice, and a meal as well. So we have the last covenant I want to cover between people. We have David and the elders in 2 Samuel 5:3. So the elders of Israel came to the kingdom of Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them before Yahuwah in Hebron. Then they anointed the king over Israel. So what other covenants do we have? We have the covenants made between Elohim and man. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about these types of covenant. Okay, I'm going to get to the meat of the bone here, per se. So what we have is the Noah's covenant, the one that Yahuwah made with the creatures and everything thereof. We have Yahuwah with Abraham. There were actually two covenants made. Then we have Yahuwah with Israel. Okay, and then we have a limited covenant in Exodus 34 that was made also with Israel. And no, it was not the book of the law. No, someone may actually think that, but no. So we'll go over the first covenant here, and this is the one that Yahuwah made with Noah, or Elohim made with Noah. Yahuwah made a unilateral covenant with Noah and all flesh, every living creature. Okay, this covenant was unilateral and autonomous covenant because no one had to accept or agree to it for it to be valid. Yahuwah made an oath to himself to preserve the life of man, creatures, and plants' life by the flood, never again to harm the earth. So it was one that he made for the preservation of man and all living creatures. What was the sign? Well, the rainbow, as we know. Genesis 6:18, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go out of the ark, your sons and your wives and your sons and your wives, with you. And then on Genesis 9:8, then Elohim spoke to Noah and his sons with him, saying, "As for me, behold, I will establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, birds, the cattle, and every beast that is with you." Okay. So we're going to go ahead, and the second covenant we see in the Old Testament is the first covenant Yahuwah made with Abraham. Okay. Now that is in Genesis 12. Now this was a unilateral and unconditional covenant. Now this covenant is unconditional in the sense that Yahuwah's promise here is not contingent upon human response or behavior. Yahuwah is making an oath with himself, and no blood was needed, making it a covenant unconditional and unilateral. Hebrews 6:13 reads, "For when Yahuwah made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, saying, Surely blessings I will bless you, and multiply I will multiply you." And what we have here, we have a proposal. Okay. Now, even though it was no one higher than himself, there was still a proposal given to Abraham, according to Genesis 12. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. Now, that word Barak, H1288, is very important. I will go over that a little bit more because there were some discoveries that you can see how that word had always to do with the multiplication of Yahuwah's chosen people. And it reads after on Genesis 12:2, "And make your name great, and you shall be a blessing." Barak Ka. Instead of Barak, it's Barakah, H1293. First mention here. And it's also defined as a benediction of prosperity, favored by Yahuwah, who will receive extreme fortune and happiness. Now, this very time, and that's according to Jusinius Lexicon. Now, the very first time the word Barak, the very first, the H1288, is found all the way back in Genesis 1:22. Remember there that verse has both Barak, 1288, and Barakah. So one is blessed, the other one is blessing. Two different words, two different definitions. Now, like I said, it's first mentioned in back in Genesis 1:22, which reveals the original intention and blessing for the land, the creatures of the earth, man and women on the earth. Genesis 1:22, and Elohim blessed them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the sea, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And Elohim created, and then on Genesis 1:27, Elohim created him, male and female. He created them, and Elohim blessed them, Barak, and Elohim said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And then we see this word again that's associated with the multiplication of all things by a blessing in Genesis 9:1. So Elohim blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Okay. So we see the association here with this word and where it was first used, and it had to do with the multiplication of families or of creatures, because eventually the man was to take dominion over what? All living creatures. So Yahuwah first blessed the living creatures that, they were named by Adam, and then we took dominion. We're supposed to take dominion over, right? Now, Noah was blessed by this multiplication of his family. The Father made man and woman so to multiply. It is written, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, there are many reasons why Yahuwah had to give protection to Abraham and his descendants. They were living under a kingdom of the world where some were lawless, like the Amorites. Now, all covenants of promises, all covenants of promise, okay, derive from this unconditional Genesis 2:12 covenant, according to also Hebrews 9:15. And also we look at Luke, and this also attaches to Genesis 12. Luke 1, chapter 1, verse 72. To perform the mercies promised to our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the oath which he swore to our father Abraham. So he took an oath by no one greater than himself. Okay, and this was Zechariah prophesying of Yahusha, attaching Yahusha to bring us back into Genesis 12, the promise. Okay. And so this is on this right here, it shows the notes that I just described, but they're written there for you as well. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to the next covenant, which is also made with Abraham. We have here in Genesis 15. Now, there are 4 things that must be present and must connect back to Abraham for it to be a covenant of promise. Now, this covenant on Genesis 15, it is the guarantee of the covenant made on Genesis 12. This type of covenant is bilateral and conditional covenant. Now, this type of covenant would need to have some type of a hypothetical situation as a conditional attached to the agreement. If one can find words if or when in an agreement, that would make it conditional. Like if you do this, then I'll give you this. That makes it conditional. Okay. We also have a death penalty attached to this. And then we have the sign of circumcision. Okay, which these 2 are connected, the penalty and the sign. The circumcision is, of course, seen on Genesis 17. But back to Genesis 15, Yahusha walked between the divided animal broken pieces. He was the flame that walked through it. He was the kinsman redeemer for, he took the death penalty if the covenant was to be broken. This is a good example why Yahusha is considered the author of salvation. The circumcision was first required as a sign to enter covenant, and that's why there were cutting of animals. But the Father displayed the vision of his Son taking the death penalty as he walked through the pieces. So the only way one could enter into the new covenant of the promise that was through Yahusha after his death penalty, after the death penalty condition was paid by him, as Paul had explained in Galatians. For in Yahushua HaMashiach, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything but faith working through love. So there is no entrance signing to covenant by circumcision of the flesh, but by the circumcision of the heart that can only be performed by Yahushua. Hallelujah. And we have here a symbol of what Yahushua represents and what the priests were reminded of the prophetic vision that Abraham saw. On Leviticus 16:13, he, talking about Aaron, is to put incense on the fire before Yahuwah, and the cloud of incense will cover the mercy seat above the testimony, so that he will not die. The fire we see here with the Ark of the Covenant representing the prophecy of the coming Redeemer that would cover Israel for the transgression against the covenant. Hallelujah again. Get excited when we talk about Yahushua. Okay. All right. So here we have the proposal, the acceptance, blood ratification, and covenant confirming meal. And I took the liberty to write down the verses for you also. You can make notes if you need to. Okay. All right. So now we have the covenant promise made with Israel. Now we'll start off that Israel was commanded to place on the doorpost during Passover, the blood. Okay, leaving Egypt, the inheritance of the promise was And it's that what spoke to Abraham 430 years earlier, when the covenant was ratified with blood. Okay, so we see that 430 years later, after basically Genesis 15, okay, and 400 years after Isaac was born. So on the proposal here, we have on Exodus 19:4, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you back to myself. Now, therefore, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So again, we do have an acceptance, a proposal acceptance, blood ratification, and covenant confirming meal. Okay, so we just heard the proposal. Okay, he's going to make a nation of priests. So we have the acceptance just a little bit further down on Exodus 19:8. Then all the people answered together and said, all that Yahuwah has spoken, we will do. Not only once they said that, they said that 3 times. Exodus 24:3 and 24:7. They agreed again, and this time at the last one on right before everything was ratified with blood, they said, and be obedient. Not only will do everything that you say and command, but we also be obedient. Now, being in covenant is about being faithful and doing the works of the priesthood as Yahushua deems necessary. You can see this in the covenant after Yahushua reminded Peter that he needed to love him if he was going to be employed as a faithful servant to do the good works of the kingdom. 3 times, he needed to say he loved them. This reminds us what Paul wrote in Galatians 5:6. For in Yahushua HaMashiach, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through what? Love. Faith to do what you're told through what? Love. Now, Yahuwah wanted to put this new covenant in our hearts. Okay, so by Peter's own words and conviction, he was willing to do that. What Yahushua commanded him from a circumcised heart and out of love. So we also had the blood ratification. We see this in 12:8. And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. We also have the covenant confirming meal, Exodus 24:11. So they saw Yahuwah and they ate and drank. And the good thing is that they didn't die. and after this, pretty much nothing else was added after 24:11. As it reads on Deuteronomy 5:22, Moshe said, these words Yahuwah spoke to all of our assembly in the mountains from the midst of the fire, the cloud and the thick darkness and the loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave it to me. And that's Moshe speaking. And in Exodus 24:3, this connects with that. So Moshe came and told the people all the words Yahuwah and all the judgment and, basically the ordinances of the covenant. Now, there was another sign given to Israel before Moshe came down the mountain with the tablets of stone and before the golden calf reached. That was to keep the Shabbat a set apart day of rest. Exodus 31:16. Therefore, the children of Israel shall keep the Shabbat to observe the Shabbat throughout their generations as a perpetual what? Covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For 6 days, Yahuwah made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th he rested and was refreshed. And when he had made when he had made an end of speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave Moshe 2 tablets of stone of the testimony, written by the finger of Elohim. Okay. And then on Exodus 31:32, we see that there was the breach of the golden calf. So we are just a couple of more slides. And I wanted to touch a little, just briefly on the book of the law. I want to go deeper into this because this is a very important subject to study if we're going to truly understand and be able to rightfully divide the word as it is written so we can better comprehend it and walk it out. I'll start off with Hebrews 9:8. Okay. Now it basically I'll just skip to the verse 10. Concern only with foods and drinks, variation, washings, fleshly ordinances imposed, and it's talking about imposed by the book of the law until the time of Reformation. So we see here that there will be a change of law eventually, right? So there will be a change of law according to Genesis, 49:10. And if the book of the law was ratified, then why in Joshua, more commandments were added to the book of the law? Okay, so if a book needs to, basically a book has to be, I'm sorry, a covenant has, once it's ratified, you cannot add anything else to it, according to Galatians, right? So why are they adding more laws after Deuteronomy to the book of the law? Okay, because it wasn't ratified. It goes beyond. It goes from 24:12, and then beyond Deuteronomy into the book of Joshua. Because in Joshua 24:26, it reads, Joshua wrote the words in the book of the law, in this book of the law. And he took a large stone and he set it up under an oak tree that was, by the sanctuary of Yahuwah. Okay, so he wrote his words in the book of the law. Okay, so he added to it. Now, since one cannot add to the covenant according to Galatians 3:15, then all the laws that preceded the book of the covenant cannot be a covenant. Okay, makes sense. During the Levitical priesthood, there was no covenant made that was ratified with blood until Moshiach was delivered up to the tree. Now, the book of the law is synonymous with the book of the law of Moses, but it is not a covenant. The book of the law does not have the same stipulations as a covenant, and there is no agreement from Israel. It was imposed. Yahuwah didn't engage with them. In addition, there was no confirming meal nor a blood ratification. And in Galatians 3:10, it reads, for as many as are of the works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. There's a distinction because there's a lot of curses in the book of the law to work in the covenant. There's only, I believe there's one limited one, and that has to do with honoring your father and mother. So we have in Hebrews 7:11, and it reads, therefore, if perfection went through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise according to the order of Melchizedek and not according to the order of Aaron? Okay, two distinct priesthoods, and there, of course, there has to be a change of law because of it, according to Genesis 49:10. All right, and that was already prophesied. And we have also in Ezekiel 20:23, just to cement this in, I also raised my hand in an oath to those in the wilderness, that I would scatter them among the Gentiles and disperse them throughout the countries, because they had not executed my judgments, but had despised my statutes, profaned my Shabbats, and their eyes fixed on their fathers' idols. Therefore, I will also give them up to statutes that were not good, and judgments by which they could not live. Okay? So right there you have it, by Yahuwah's own words. Okay, so as we finish this up here, we have a limited covenant, but it's not a covenant of promise. And this was had to do with the limited land expansion and stewardship of the land in Exodus 34. Okay, so as we know, the covenant was broken. Circumcision, they didn't have circumcision for 40 so years. But once they entered the land, what did they do? The first thing they did was get circumcised, according to Joshua. Okay, and we have the three. There's actually 5 covenants of promise. I only touched up on 3, the ones that are found in the Old Testament, but there's one that already was made by Yahushua, but there will be another one in the future that's coming. So there'll be a total of 5, and for that we are blessed. So the 3 that we know of and we went through today is the first 2 that were made to Abraham. Also, Yahuwah with Israel.